Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our continuation. A lot of stock taking happened yesterday, and today we will be looking taking the discussion forward. And we've got a stellar panel, people who know what they are talking about. And this is quite an achievement of Michael and his team in terms of this, having the basically second CEPS-funded project, and we will be hearing, capitalizing on all the expertise they are bringing here, and we'll be talking about the DCFTA, as you know, and it's really about the nuts and bolts. So, big rhetoric, big expectations about access to the single market. 6, 7, 5 years on, where are we? DCFTA, how DC is it? How has it worked and why? And what lessons have we learned so far? Are the lessons similar or different? And what do we do? What needs to be done? So let's have a starting point with our 3 associated countries. Started with Veronika, and then Veronika Movchan. She doesn't need introduction, but I need to. So it will be Veronika, and then Tinatin, Akhvlediani. I think yesterday I did better than today. Yes, second day fatigue. And then we'll have Denis Cenusa. So the team is well known, and finally, taking the matters forward will be Michael Emerson. So the presentation, let's keep them short, 7-8 minutes, because we started with a practice run yesterday. We had a lot of lively debates. So I hope we can continue our disagreement. You know, I am for sparks and drama in the morning. So Veronika, your time.
Kasia, thank you very much, and I'm very grateful to everybody who came today and did not attempt to watch us on video broadcast and just come into this nice room to discuss very important issues. Basically, yes, I will try to answer very quickly this question, which is easy and difficult at the same time, whether the DCFTA fit for purpose for Ukraine. And my answer will be yes and no at the same time. Why? As we discussed yesterday, we have a lot of achievements, and I would say that FTA part, that is the mutual opening of the markets, removal of almost all tariffs, definitely helped, and we saw that in the changes in exports and imports, the increase in the role of EU and expansion of both variety and level of processing of products shipped to the EU. And yes, because DCFTA pushed for regulatory approximation, we still are not completely there. The ACA talks are still to come, but the preparation are really in the very serious stage now. We are expecting for major opening the customs. Thanks to common transit system, we expect much more to come in various sectoral spheres. That was already discussed, and we can go into these details if you are interested. But basically, it's not only what we are expecting to have, it's also what we are still lacking in the DCFTA and the association. Talking about the trade part. First, we have things that are like in the blind spots, like road permits. It was not expected to be a problem, then it was negotiated, but it came to the story, and we actually bumped into the issue of European legal structure. Then this is a bilateral issues, and this bilateral issue creates the barrier for the global trade, not global, but EU-Ukraine trade in general. But it's also because of the association agreement, DCFTA, the regulation, and actually our life are not carved in stone. There are new spheres that are not fully covered or not covered in the DCFTA, and they have to be covered in order to ensure this integration. We are talking, for example, about the digital single market that was not as a term then the agreements were negotiated. And Ukraine is now managing to bring this new agenda into the framework, saying that it is in the spirit But it's also transport union, which is not on the table for discussion for Ukraine, but which is important. Or it's an energy union as the next step of the energy community. So basically, if we want to understand whether the DCFTA fits the purpose, we need to understand also what is the purpose. It's another dimension that we debated yesterday, because what the purpose is to have exports growing, or to have investments growing, or to improve welfare of the people. That was the discussion already yesterday, that the purpose of the agreement is not per se to tick the boxes of all legislation, is to change the economic situation in the country to improve welfare. But here we are coming to the issue of indirect linkages, because in order to have, for example, trade growth, it's easy part. You remove barriers, you reduce costs, and you get the trade growing. But if you want investments, you cannot talk only about DCFTA, you should talk about the whole association agreement, or maybe about the whole political environment and the rule of law and fundamentals. And if you want to talk about people's life and how people feel, you're coming even to more difficult things, because here is a labor market, here's the issue of social protection, of many things that have to be fixed in order to get this achievement. And it's not like easy, while politicians say we need to deliver now. And here we come to a problem. And moreover, while we are talking about DCFTA, it's not only these sectoral things. It's actually, it's our political agenda, because we are coming to the end of the transition periods. In several years, it's already 7 years, even for Ukraine it's mostly, okay, it's 5 formally, 7 de facto, because we had autonomous trade preferences and implementation of regulations. But quite soon we are done. And the question, what is next? The concept that first do your homework and then we think, it's not right in the political environment. So we have to think now, what should be next? Especially given to account that the world is very dynamic. We have Green Deal that we discussed, we have other dimensions. So in parallel with doing technical things, in parallel with bringing better life, we have to think, what is our big next ambition? Otherwise, we will lose the momentum even in what we have now. If we are not running fast, we will be not achieving. It's a Lewis Carroll very famous thing that I really realized. I read it in the childhood, but I realized now, even now, that you have to run fast to stay where you are. And if you want to achieve something, you have to run even faster. So let's discuss that.
Great, thank you very much, Veronika, for setting the standard very high in terms of speaking in plain terms about linking economics, trade, and politics as well. So well done. And now over to Tina Akhvlediani. I'm improving, see, work in progress. Tina is another economist, but who can speak plainly about economics. So Tina, over to you. Please explain where Georgia is at the moment. Thank you.
Many thanks, Kasia. Many thanks for practicing my surname. And let me start today's panel just being very happy that we are speaking at a very gender-balanced panel. I'm very happy for that fact as well. With Georgia, let me start very briefly that back in 2014, when the agreement was signed, Georgia already had its trade liberalized with the EU, vis-a-vis the world. So it's a good starting point to start what this agreement actually added. What was the added value? And the added value was this DC part, deep and comprehensive, which was EU legislation that Georgia signed up to implement, to approximate, and sustainability dimension in trade flows, okay? So the TSD provisions, as we call them. Now, where we stand 5-7 years after, it's a success that a lot of speakers actually also yesterday flagged, and I don't want to repeat a lot and spend much time on that. Georgia has done like huge progress on approximating the EU legislation. We talked about it, right? The standards, TBT, SPS. Country has a fully fledged e-procurement system, the customs code, which is actually in line with the new EU customs code, which is beyond, by the way, beyond the association agreement and the DCFTA. So this is to be noted. But the question we ask, as Veronika was saying, what we are aiming at, right? So what does this all serve to? And this should all translate into intensified and comprehensive trade, so-called. So otherwise, the end result of this will be copy-pasting EU laws into Georgian legislation, which should not be the end result. And which brings me to the next point. If you want to assess how much trade has been intensified, let's go to numbers, and I'm not going to be technical, I promise. It's just very briefly to refer where Georgia stands in terms of trade flows. So what we have today is Georgian exports are not much picking up. They're just falling short expectations. The half of Georgia's trade goes to two countries, Bulgaria and Romania. Obviously, we don't take that at a face value, right? So it's entry gates to the European Union. And then the goods are spread across the EU, but still half of the exports go to two countries in the European Union. And yesterday, I remember Deputy Foreign Minister mentioned that there are new companies which started exporting to the EU. There are indeed several hundreds of new companies which started exporting to the EU. But let's put that numbers into perspective. Overall, less than 1% of Georgian enterprises exports to the European Union. And this number is very small. And when we look at the trade in goods overall, we see their stagnation. So the trade share of the EU in Georgia's overall trade is roughly the same as it was in 2014, right? But we also observe some other thing. I mean, there are the reasons behind that. Let me briefly flag that, right? First of all, this is Georgian economy. You can obviously sign a lot of trade agreements, but it's what your economy can offer, first and foremost. And let's put it bluntly, I mean, Georgia is not self-sufficient economy. It's import-dependent economy. So there is only so much country can produce, and the country cannot really provide this large-scale, continuous basis exports, the one thing. The other one is simply bad luck with geography. There is no border with the EU. There is no land border with the EU, and that makes trade very, very costly. Transportation is costly. And also several speakers mentioned yesterday the Black Sea potential, and I agree with them. The Black Sea should be better exploited, the potential of it. There should be some corridors, the homework for Georgia and the EU, both of them. But where the DCFTA parts come in, and this is the key importance here today, is the implementing these legislative issues that Georgia put into its legislation, right? And whether the businesses actually meet the EU standards. Yes, standards are into the laws, but it remains very costly for businesses to meet these food safety standards, to meet the technical standards. And there is simply no laboratory in Georgia that can have a mutual recognition with the EU, or they can issue a certificate that can be recognized at the EU border. And why I'm saying that, just to give you the clue, like, we've been speaking to businesses. I'm not bringing that up from the papers or literature review, but anytime Georgian producers send the raw materials, I'm not even talking about a manufactured good, it's a gamble. It's a 50-50. It's going to enter the EU border or not. Like hazelnuts, tons of hazelnuts go to Bulgaria. They may get then the judgment in Bulgarian border laboratory that, you know, it doesn't fit the food safety standard. It comes back. So I mean, put yourself in the shoes of Georgian businesses, right? It's very costly. It's not efficient. And for sure, EU should help Georgia to put these laboratories in practice. This is where we stand today, okay? And the other thing, I'm going to be short, other thing that we also notice in the data is, you know, going beyond the trading goods. There is also goods, there is also trade in services, okay? And that's where the Georgian economic structure comes in. So Georgian economy is a services-based economy. Georgia doesn't do much manufacturing, okay? And that, look at the data, the increase in services sector and the growth in trade and services is just really significant, and particularly in ICT sector, we have increase of 9-folds. Georgia has been exporting digital services, and that's a very good point, so that it's time for Georgia and the EU to revisit the agreement and to actually revisit and update provisions of the agreement, because DCFTAs feature services, but there are many reservations actually from the EU side, not from Georgia's side, and this is, I think, good point to revisit the agreements and update if necessary, and I think it's quite necessary. sorry. And that also brings me to another point, which is these digital areas that Veronika also very briefly referred to, because this area is something that puts forward the EU legislation, which was very dynamic. Okay, so when the agreements were signed, it was 2014. The EU has put forward the digital single market in 2015. So the EU acquis, which is included in the agreements, is already outdated. And this is also a good time to revisit. By the way, Moldova has upgraded its annexes 2 years ago, and I think Georgia, given its progress, also should revisit the agreement and push further to come closer with the EU acquis and with the EU's digital agenda, because there is a potential there. And if the trade policy doesn't respond, the growth in digital trade would just come to the dead end. I think this is briefly all what I wanted to say, just very briefly, not to miss that greening trade areas, because there was a lot of discussion on that yesterday as well. Obviously, there is potential here. I think this is going to come up in the discussion. This is something that Georgia has to put forward, because this is high on the EU agenda. Ukraine was more active than Georgia on pushing that, opening the dialogue on a Green Deal. And I think if Georgia doesn't do it, then it falls even behind with the trading with the EU. So this is another homework for Georgia and also for the EU to put that forward. And I'm gonna stop maybe here, Kasia, so that to roughly briefly respond to the question whether DCFTAs still fit the purpose. Yeah, the DC part fits the purpose, but it's all about its proper implementation. There are the issues that Georgia and EU has to work further, and there are the areas which simply need to be revisited, updated, and upgraded in the agreements. And I'll stop here. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much for keeping it so focused and, again, combining trade and sort of the wider political issues around what is the purpose of the DCFTA. And now it's perhaps a bit of a reality check. Now, so over to Denis Cenusa, another well-known expert, and Denis will be talking about the case of Moldova. And you may even want to mention the upgrades, updates of the annexes, and tell us a bit more about if this is something, that you feel makes a difference.
Well, I think that Moldova is definitely a country that can be studied in terms of how a country can adjust quickly in the times of crisis. Because I think that the association agreement and DCFTA was very useful to Moldova exactly in the moment when Russia applied sanctions, and we have seen how the European markets can actually help and mitigate the consequences of the trade sanctions applied by the Russian authorities. In this regard, I think that the DCFTA was not particularly, in the case of Moldova, it was not only about opening the markets to the EU, because the opening of the EU market started earlier in 2008. Lots of products that were already competitive on the European market started to be exported. So it was important, of course, to open the categories of goods that can be competitive in the EU. But I think that one of the reasons behind this agreement was, of course, to actually help the European integration of the country. And then so yeah, one of the triggers of implementation of the DCFTA was actually the Russian factor, and I need to underline this aspect. Why DCFTA started to work so well in the case of Moldova and not so much when it comes to Georgia? It's definitely because of geography, and I agree with what Tinatin mentioned. For Moldova, it was very important to have a natural ally like Romania, which is close, which was ready to open the market for certain goods, especially wines and agri-food products, and that is why we have such a high level of export that go to Romania, and basically about 25 to 27% of the exports that is counted as a share of exports going to the EU is exactly absorbed by the Romanian side. And therefore, even in the negotiations with the European Union, I think that this was one of the aspects that were mentioned when I talked to some colleagues that were part of the negotiation, that the EU was, of course, Moldova is, first of all, Moldova would never flood the EU market with even with re-exported products from other countries and regions. But for the EU, it was clear from the very beginning that Romania is going to be the first market that is going to actually receive and consume the Moldovan goods. And therefore, it was not really so difficult for the Moldovan side to be as ambitious as possible in the negotiation of the association agreement. Now, answering to the question of our panel, I think that obviously the DCFTA is fitting some of the purposes, but again, we have to be honest. Do we want just to implement some technical regulations, to have the EU standards voluntarily? By the way, we speak about the EU standards that are voluntarily implemented or operationalized by the companies. They are not forced on them. Or we want actually to end up with sustainable development of the economy, with the social, with the better salaries for the workers. Why I'm bringing this issue up is because yes, we attract companies from the EU, but they are investing. They are investing in the free zones, and the companies have a very positive conditions. They don't pay. They pay lower taxes, but the salaries they pay to the work to the labor work is very low compared to what the same labor force could earn in the EU. And then we have a very interesting situation. The companies that are coming to Moldova, they are looking for workers, but they cannot find them. Why? Because the qualified professional laborers, they left the country. Why? Because the salaries offered in free zones are very low. We speak about 300 euro, which is the average salary in the country. So let's try to make the DCFTA not only looking nice on the paper, and I like the report of the EU, which is nicely explaining that Moldova has gotten into the accreditation body. The MOLDAC, the accreditation agency, is a member of the European organization. That Moldova has implemented or adopted the EU custom code and all of that. It's very nice, but now let's translate all of that into better lives and higher salaries for the citizens, because this will be the ultimate actually output and the ultimate goal of the association agreement with the EU. So we should speak about people-centered approach, sustainable growth, which obviously will include the element of a Green Deal, green economy, digitalization, and many other aspects that are so important, and depends on the one hand on how are performing the companies, local companies, and those that are coming to Moldova, but also how efficient is the public sector and the state institutions. And I want, just before ending my intervention, I would like to remind that Moldova is struggling to attract and to retain talent within the public sector. We have ministries which are dealing with DCFTA, but they are understaffed. We have Ministry of Agriculture, which is understaffed. We have, I think that the most efficient and the most well prepared is the Ministry of European Integration, Foreign Affairs and European Integration, but I'm sorry, DCFTA is not about diplomacy only. It's about very technical, very tough issues, and they have a lot of implications for all the other agencies and institutions that work both at the central level and the local level. Let's not forget the association agreement is not only for Chisinau, it's not only for Kiev, and it's not only for Tbilisi, it's for the entire country. So the local authorities should be involved in the process of implementation at the local level of the association agreement and DCFTA. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We are problematizing the DCFTAs, lots of sort of food for thought, and I really, Denis, you flagged up something which bothers me as well. With the DCFTA being so laced with the acquis, there is a real sort of tendency to shortcut the acquis download, basically legal approximation, as a benchmark of success. And that's very easy to do for the basic, when you are in the EU and you want to get your job, to do your job quickly. Does it deliver on the bigger aims of the DCFTA? And this is, you know, the embeddedness of the DCFTA in the wider political and even infrastructural context. It's great to have DCFTA. Do we have roads to transport our goods? You know, and all this sort of infrastructure to integrate with the EU is of relevance here. But now we are looking forward, and we have one of the conspirators or plotters. I think Michael was involved in the feasibility studies, and you campaigned for the DCFTA rather than just FTA, or you actually were, you know, Georgia wanted the FTA. It didn't want the DCFTA. Georgia accepted what was on the table. Where are we now? Michael, the political context which Veronika stressed and other people, you know, panelists echoed, where are we? Especially, you know, is the DCFTA a tool or a goal in itself? And what is needed to keep the momentum going? So, fit for purpose, the answer is in your hands.
Thank you very much, Kateryna. Just first, a little personal word. I mean, big thanks to the organizers, big and warm thanks to the organizers for at last bringing us all together again after 2 years. I will address, first of all, very briefly, the question on the card. DCFTAs or an association agreement fit for purpose still, question mark. My answer to that is yes and no. The yes part is, both are very serious, it's not a frivolous answer. The yes part is that trade policies and key regulatory policies and political norms are long-term affairs, particularly if on the more technical stuff regulatory policies change, are changing rapidly in the EU side, if there's provision for updating, and the agreements have precisely that, and there's an updating process which is going on, and it's a very extensive and complex purpose, but that's okay. Okay, that's the yes part. Now, the no part is, after 7 years, all of us who are more or less in contact with the political dynamics of the three countries and sentiment in your parliaments and the public opinion sense the need for a fresh political momentum to be added to the present process. Yesterday, somebody asked the question, what if we, the three, do everything right? What can we expect from the European Union? And the answer is, quite frankly, there's no answer to that question today. And the very competent and honest civil servant who replied said, well, if you implement the DCFTA 100%, then you can start asking questions. Well, that was kind of off-the-record remark, but that is emphasizing that as of today, there is no answer to this absolutely central question. So I now want to offer some 3 ideas for what could be the fresh political momentum. And the key words are 1, trio, 2, Green Deal, and 3, new staged enlargement accession concept. Now, the first 2 are well known, so I do it very fast. The third one is more complex and more new, so I'll spend most of the time on that. Okay, trio. I think this conference here now has been talking trio. The European Union institutions have not been particularly fast in pronouncing the word trio, and in particular with the Eastern Partnership Summit upcoming, there is the prioritization of the Eastern Partnership with sotto voce remarks, if any, about trio. The proposition I would advance is this prioritization should be reversed, because the Eastern Partnership is increasingly obsolete and the other 3 are moving further away from Europe, and the trio themselves are, with ups and downs, advancing. So the TRIO initiative should be regarded by the EU as Europe's eastern front line, hard front line in the real fight for European values, given that the Russian threat remains. On that, ideas, since the TRIO flag has been put on the flagpole, we hear yesterday different ideas as to how to use the TRIO, and that is excellent, and that can be further developed. And we look forward to the European institutions following through. I mean, why is this really necessary? For this reason, it is clear to all of us that the Eastern Partnership joint staff working document heading into the summit in a few days' time is not motivating Belarus or Azerbaijan to move closer to Europe. So it does not work there. However, by not emphasizing the TRIO, it is communicating a discouraging message to the TRIO, who are lumped together with the other three in public discourse. And that is damaging and should be reversed. Okay, enough on that. Now, Green Deal, green transition. This is a big new thing, and it should be big particularly for Ukraine, but the others as well, but especially Ukraine for obvious reasons. Olga Stefanashina yesterday said interesting things about the task force she participates in with Kateryna, other Kateryna Matonova of DG NEAR. They're asking the right questions. This looks a promising initiative, but it's still very much a beginning. And there is the rather sinister mechanism for Ukraine of the CBAM, border adjustment tax mechanism. Now, Olga was able to say that at least she's having conversations about conditions under which that would not apply, or you would be a special case. So that needs to be followed through in order to make, well, to avoid the negative, the very serious potential negative of the CBAM, but on the positive side, to push through really ambitious green transition policy. Okay, now on to the third issue, which is the most, well, the newest and the most complex one. The story goes like this. We published in, with Veronika and Denis and Tamara Akhvlediani, we published a second text on Balkan East European comparisons. So I'm actually bridging into the next session here. This proposed in outline, and this is reflected in our third edition handbooks, all three of them, or which one over there. This was sketching the idea that the enlargement process should be broken down into a set of stages rather than to be a binary in or out process. This immediately clicked with both the European Parliament and those of you, you know, Mr. Kubilius is a very activist supporter of the TRIO. In fact, he invented the expression, but also in the Balkans. And we are now in partnership with Balkan think tank network, with whom over the last months we've developed a much more developed version of this staged accession model, which is published in a paper entitled A Template for Staged Accession, which is available on our websites. So what's the content, what's the red meat in there? Staged accession, 4 stages, 1, 2, 3, 4. What's the idea? First starting point, actually, really is what the organizers have very helpfully put into the document, this blue document. At the back, there are quantitative ratings for all of the chapters for the 3 countries, which comes from our handbooks. This quantitative rating is intended to be not just an academic exercise, but to provide a benchmark basis for more transparent, reliable, and explicit conditionality for more for more. Okay, all the institutions can pronounce more for more in speeches, but it's very vague and it's not credible as of now. So let's make it credible by pegging it on these ratings. And if you, from year to year, advance the ratings, you get more structural funds and more institutional participation. So that begins to get into stage 1. Stage 2, you're beginning to get into more advanced, apart from more structural funds, more advanced institutional participation in the Council, participation with speaking rights but not voting rights. This is analogous in Norway in the Schengen mechanism. And in the Parliament it could be having delegated members with speaking rights but not yet voting rights. Let me go to stage 3. This we call new member states. Stage 4 is conventional member states. Now, the point about stage 3, and here the really, I think, interesting point for us to be discussing and debating and further developing is this. In stage 3, it would be the answer to the question of yesterday, what do we get if we do everything right? The answer is, if you do everything right, and all the ratings are, broadly speaking, positive, good, then you get full participation in everything in the EU, with 2 exceptions, which are meeting the principal political objection within the European Union to further enlargement. That is to say, no veto power for the new member states, but they can have qualified majority voting power in our book. And secondly, no member of the European Commission. These are the 2 worries about further enlargement for many people who reasonably argue about it. Now, the very interesting twist to this is that progressive people, and there are some in the European Union, think about, in the Future of Europe conference and all of that, what should be systemic reforms of the European Union. Well, the easiest items at the top of the agenda are to reduce veto power in the Council and to revert to the Lisbon Treaty provision that there should be only members of the Commission should only be 2/3 of the number of member states, which the Council, European Council, has not activated, but it's still there in the Lisbon Treaty. And as regards the reduction in veto powers, that actually would require treaty amendment, but for those of you who are really into the EU business, this can be facilitated by use of the so-called passerelle clause that allows for easier ratification. Okay, let us suppose that that is happening a certain number of years down the road. Hey, this is rather interesting. The conventional member states with less veto powers and fewer members of the Commission, this actually has converged on what we have defined to be stage 3, say the new member state status. So this stage 3, which some people might be tempted to regard as being invited to have a second-class status, the objection to that objection is no. This new member state condition, as defined in relation to what would happen to stage 4, this is the progressive member state regime, and stage 4 would be converging on stage 3, which allows us to have a very, very attractive scenario, which takes many years ahead, but at least it is a potential vision that we can work on, and which for those members, those of you here which want to get into a credible membership perspective. It answers the major objections of the conservative member states about not having more Polands with, I say that to catch up, more Polands with veto power. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. This, such an elegant and really forward-looking. I think Michael is the winner in terms of actually forward-looking vision and getting around the impasse that we experience. But there's, where we are, almost, I get a sense that we are victims of our own success in terms of getting this very comprehensive, very demanding agreements without the political momentum and clout to keep it sort of going. So how we are going to reconcile this, and this goes back to the assumptions underpinning the association agreement and the DCFTA. The DCFTA being the engine, the cornerstone of the association agreement, and access to the single market being this golden carrot for the associated countries. The golden carrot, turns out, needs other vegetables around, and in order to basically be edible. And it's edible in different degrees for different reasons. So we need to problematize, going back, I can think of several questions to basically go back to the panelists. But we have the DCFTA as it is. Why has it worked the way it works? What is needed? And what do we do about the political underpinning of the association agreement, which is something that we are, by now, I think, in consensus, not even majority, I think in absolute consensus here, that is needed. So I'll open the floor, to the questions, challenges, comments. I would also, while basically we're thinking about the questions, encourage the panelists to challenge each other to basically provide basically to have a bit of discussion between the three countries. At the moment, we've had the national sort of narratives. What about the comparative element, which seems so interesting in a way? Why it has delivered, slightly different results across. Geography has been mentioned, but it seems there are common problems, but also differences. So, anybody who feels bold enough to talk about the DCFTA and questions and comments?
The whole bunch of engagement, not only an association agreement. So I will try to extend your question actually and try to look what are the achievements related to the rule of law, which is a part that is not included in the DCFTA, but it is fine at any steps, the one already underlined by Denis or somebody else. So actually, is it not more about the internal will to do the reforms and to get closer to the rule of law and to take extra engagements more than the fact of really applying in very strict terms just the DCFTA? Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to take, the issue of fundamentals?
Yeah, I would love to. Basically, that's what I didn't touch a lot in my speech, but basically it's something that we heatedly debated, but here it's no debate, it's a consensus basically. Fundamentals are fundamentals because they are in their ground of everything. This is a part of our handbook that we started, that actually, if we are very wrong on fundamentals, is the one and only reason that the whole agreement can be actually scrapped. For Ukraine, because it's easier to talk about Ukraine, the rule of law, or actually the deficiencies in the reform of the rule of law, and fight this corruption, but I think that actually the judiciary reform is also in the ground of the successful fight for corruption, because it's any anti-corruption institution would not work if we have flaws in the courts. But This is the major reason why we do not see, I think, the flow of investments, both foreign but also domestic. Because whatever perfect rules in terms of regulations, technical regulations, sanitary, phytosanitary rules, whatever, if you have no proper protection of property rights, including standard and intellectual, the investments that will come, it will be only very risky, very short-term, more like gambling than real long-term investments. And that is one of the major reasons why we do not see the boom in the economy that was expected. So we have a very, still, I don't want to say that DCFTA didn't deliver. It delivered. If we would not have DCFTA, the whole shocks will be much worse. And exports plays an extremely important role for the economy, and exports to the EU is much more important than exports to other countries. And not because of the share, it's because of the diversity. We have this perception there is only few products like corn or no, cables go to, Basically, almost all trade nomenclature that Ukraine ships anywhere, it's shipped to the EU. And it means that it's important for large, but also for medium and small enterprises. But we might have much more if we have rule of law. And here we should have the focus. But on the other hand, the problem with the real life, you cannot do it sequential. You have to live in parallel. You have to fix your fundamental problems, build on the regulations to increase trade, and at the same time think about the future. Because if you do it sequentially, you will never achieve. So yeah, it is a puzzle that we have to put together any moment of the time.
Kasia, may I go ahead? Well, thanks a lot for the question. I think Georgia is a very good example of that bit. And I agree with you, we can't really separate because yes, we talk about trade and business, but trade and business cannot be done, and it is not done in a politically unstable environment where the property rights are, not ensured. And we see that in investments straight away. We see that in stagnation of the trade flows. Yesterday here, Veronika was very informative on the events in Georgia, like incomplete justice system, politicized justice simply in the country, and we could correlate that with investments, right? When Georgia was very successful in rooting out corruption, mostly paid corruption, but still like it was growing high in the ratings, you could see that duplicated in investments. And then like slowdown in anti-corruption reforms, you can see that in stagnation in investments. It's a very, very clear picture, right? And as Veronika was saying, this is how we see that in a welfare. And again, you cannot attract investors, you cannot have more simply business coming in a country when it is very politically unstable. That's what we observe currently, unfortunately, in Georgia. And going beyond that, I talked about digital, okay? But digital, yeah, it's all about the new dimension of the trade agreements. Now, how does the data flow across the borders? Do we respect the privacy? And that's another example I wanted to say about the recent events. Again, speaking about Georgia, all this breach, right? All these leaks of these thousands of the reports, which was like a very, very bad damage of the country's international reputation when it comes to the respect of privacy and respecting this data flows, which is again against of this new EU agenda like GDPR. So it's indeed very difficult to separate. It's inseparable, and fundamentals should get more attention than they currently have. Otherwise, we can't really go far with business and with trade. I will stop here.
Thank you, Tina. And
yeah, I would like to add something to that. I believe that DCFTA it is not possible to deliver more unless we solve the rule of law issues in our countries. And I think that my yesterday's comment about Akhvlediani investment, big investment project in Georgia, brings us to the topic of oligarchy or kleptocratic influence over the decision-making. And here, Moldova, it's a very good example of showing how some sectors could be actually were monopolized by some kleptocratic slash oligarchy groups in the last 7 years. But at the same time, it's interesting that we have noticed that the foreign companies that were coming to Moldova, they had two options. One is to go to free economic zones where they were feeling safe, and also they were just more they had more advantages to actually have successful businesses in Moldova. And at the same time, another way of doing business in Moldova was to have good connections or close connections with the decision makers, which at that point were kind of interfered with oligarchy groups. So we had the state of capture for several years, and going back to Georgia, that probably Georgia is facing exactly what we had in Moldova several years ago. So therefore, I believe that the rule of law is crucial to make sure that the DCFTA doesn't become just some numbers in the EU's reports, or the Moldovan or our countries in general official reports that goes to the EU that everything is perfect, everything works. And another interesting point is that we also have to make sure that the rule of law involves the demonopolization on the one hand, de-oligarchization, de-offshoreization, and making sure that the regulators are functional. Because one of the reasons why we have witnessed monopolies and all of that is because the competition regulators were not properly functioning. And this is an element of the rule of law. It's not just about judiciary and courts that should be, that should work, we should fight corruption, not work according to the corruption or corrupt rules. But it's also about the other agencies that ensure, actually create this proper investment environment for the businesses to come, and actually to not go to free zones, but to go in general to operate in any part of the country and actually produce welfare for the population, going back to the individual-centered approach that the DCFTA and European integration should have.
Great, thank you very much. We have a strong consensus amongst our panelists. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Leon, let's start with.
Thank you. As a person who does not focus on DCFTA, of course, I may ask some more general questions, but these are interesting for fellows who also do not focus on DCFTA on their daily basis. And one of the questions which is, I think, being discussed these days is connected with the review of the association agreement. And what should be basically, what are the areas in DCFTA which should be covered by this review, and how you see, on the perspective of your own countries you represent, and Mr. Emerson also, on the perspective of the EU, which areas, what should be the priorities of this review, basically, yeah? Which areas should be like seriously changed or adopted or basically reshuffled in a way that it would better fit the purpose as you mentioned. I think this is something which is taking place right now. I mean, I know that the Ukrainian government is preparing for this review process. And the ideas from civil society would be very much welcome, I think. And Olga, yesterday, Olga Stefanishna, I mean, gave us, in a way, a hint that they expect to hear from us this kind of ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. And before we take the next question, perhaps I could just elaborate on this. We've got the front runner of Moldova, which has already done updates. But how do we reconcile the demand and supply, what the EU would like to update and what the countries would like to see? This is linked with the issue of capacity. How do we know what we want and what we need? And Denis mentioned a lack of capacity, especially in civil society. How many people in Georgia can talk about transportation-related acquis versus, Moldova? So the issue of updates, Moldova seems to take rather maximalist, approach to updating the annexes. What about, is there any particular strategy that you would recommend? Michael, is it something that you would like to come back on or start the ball rolling?
Yes, not on Moldova, but more in general terms. Please use the mic. Yes, I would gladly respond to Denis' question, not on Moldova, but in general terms. It's an interesting question. So you take up the landscape, you see about 35 chapters, and then you ask yourself, which of them do you want to drop or not really do? You go through them one after the other, and it's very difficult to identify chapters that should be dropped. The thing is a holistic package, and these easy expressions about, we had an example yesterday of, the whole thing is too ambitious, we should prioritize. Okay, that you can hear many diplomats who don't really understand the substance saying that. It flows very easily from their speeches. Let's get into it and discuss it, chapter by chapter. I would limit myself as a positive example of what not to do. In some chapters, the latest version of the regulation is so complex that you needn't update it today, and maybe not for quite a few years. I would take the example of the MiFID II financial services directive on derivative trading. In fact, this is not being updated. I mean, it's updated in EU law, but not being updated. So this would be an example where I would pass, but more generally, to weed out, to remove chapters, no.
Thank you very much, Michael, for starting the ball rolling.
Yeah, it's rolling over me. So,
Yes.
it's a metaphor. It's really rolling over me and over Moldova because, in my view, I would rather touch upon the challenges of legal approximation, because in my view, Moldova is basically a victim of its linguistic affiliation with Romania. And I will try to explain briefly what I mean. A lot of legislation comes from Romania. It is obviously revised, it is analyzed by the Moldovan lawmakers and the approximation center, legal approximation center, which is part of the chancellery, state chancellery. But the idea is that I talked with people who are working in the field of quality infrastructure. And they told me that, unfortunately, sometimes the laws which are basically approximated, they don't fit with the local realities. And not in terms that they are not applicable, but that those who should apply them, like companies, agencies that should, for instance, accredit the companies on certain economic activities, they just don't understand exactly the vocabulary of those laws. So yeah, we can approximate them. They will. We have the legislations which usually are mentioning what is their connection with the EU acquis. But then secondary legislation probably should be more specific and should also involve public consultations with the stakeholders. And this was something which I think that Moldova lacked when it adopted the EU standards. I talked to people from the who were at the let's say at the top of the standardization institute, and they explained me it was very complicated to organize technical groups with the companies because they just were not ready to first of all to accept that they should probably switch to EU standards because of investments and because of mentality. So, and when we started with with the left step, basically foot, then somehow the same principle not involving stakeholders in the public consultations keeps going on. And I think that this is something that we don't want to face now as a reality on the ground, but that will create will create some repercussions in the longer term. So my recommendation is to make sure that that we don't talk about what laws actually should be included or which directives and regulations of the EU should be revised in the current version of the agreement, but rather how to make sure that what we still have to approximate and transpose, actually it's really going to the roots of the changes that should involve the local stakeholders. That would be my really highlight of this issue that we talk right now.
Thank you very much. That's spot on in terms of actually the ease of actually getting on without thinking what and why we are doing. Tina, would like to?
Yeah, sure. And let me start here on commenting on your comment, Kasia, because you said Georgia didn't want to have a DCFTA. Georgia wanted to have an FTA. That's what you said. And I want to touch upon that because we have in the team Tamara Kozzeridze, who's been chief negotiator of the DCFTA, and she could not join us today, but I'm sure she would want to comment on that. So let me do that instead of her. Georgia didn't want to have a DCFTA, and fairly so, because it's a very difficult agreement, right? And you don't want to sign up for something you can't actually do realistically. And we know from Tamara, we learned, I mean, if you take the agreements, compare them, Georgia has negotiated somehow moderate deadlines, right? Moldova has very ambitious deadlines, and Georgia is somewhere in between, right? And this was, I think, done properly because it's a very difficult process. And as Michael said, because negotiations take so much time, it's a very lengthy process. It's nearly hardly possible to review the chapters and the text, right? You need the consent of all the EU member states. Well, I would doubt that. But the annexes are the ones that can be updated, and I think that's where the effort should be mobilized. Okay. And what I already flagged the areas, these are the digital sector. These are actually the things that Georgia has already been doing beyond the DCFTA. So the question is, why not do it properly? Why not getting Commission's feedback, how it should be done in practice? Why not sign up for something and then it becomes simply more legally binding? Like if we had a legally binding GDPR in Georgia, maybe this privacy thing that had happened lately, right, would not be that bad. So why not do it properly? Why not update the annexes where Georgia already went beyond the agreement? Again, digital services, why not revise EU's reservations in services? Because Georgia is willing to export more services. Why not revisit that? And why not add the areas in which the EU has a changed agenda like greening, okay? The other thing I wanted to mention, engaging the stakeholder in civil society, it's very, very important. And I said, we get a lot of insights while talking to businesses. You have to discuss it with the people who actually do trade. What are the obstacles they face? And that brings me to another point, a practical point. What has been recently done in Brussels, and it's done by CEPS and by IPRE and Iulian Groza and his team in Moldova, and Tamara Kozzeridze and her team in Georgia. With DigiTrade, that's what we are doing, is ex post evaluation of the DCFTAs of Georgia and Moldova. It's been there for 5 years, time to evaluate it. We are very busy doing that, and the Commission has, DigiTrade has recently opened online public consultations, OPC, on Monday. And I invite all of you, because I see the interest here, to go and to comment as much as you can. We will try our best to analyze that. There are the tools where civil society could be more engaged, stakeholders could be more engaged, and we should utilize those digital tools. And I'm going to stop here. Pass over to Veronika.
Great, thank you very much. Veronika.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Basically, it's quite multidimensional, I think. Ukraine initiated, pushed for this review, and we have several things. First, it's actually language that Michael used and we use in our handbook. What do we need? We need both update and upgrade of the agreement. And this is a very different, because update, EU legislation is changing in all areas. And the agreement is built on the idea of dynamic alignment. at least in the areas where we expect internal market treatment or the integration, economic integration in the European single market, internal market. And we cannot drop this process, because then we were dropping out of this dynamic integration. But in addition to the mechanical update that is happening with many annexes also in Ukraine, the recent summit confirmed a lot of annexes that were changed. We need upgrading, and upgrading should be in several dimensions. First, we need to add new dimensions that, like in the spirit of the agreement but did not exist then, it was the negotiation process, like this digital single market. But also we need to upgrade in terms of institutional mechanisms. At least in Ukraine, the whole implementation showed that the agreement was taken like a homework of Ukraine. Do it, and maybe sometime it will be somehow verified. But it does not work. The problem that if you do not verify at each stage, if you are not involved in a regular consultation and monitoring, it's a very big chance that you go wrong at the very root, at the beginning of the process. And in many cases, especially in economic integration and sectoral integration, the decision to enter the market, have the internal market treatment or have the ACA or whatever, requires EU verification. And it has to happen quickly, and it has to actually, there should be, you need two for dance. For sure, you need two for dance here, and the institutional mechanism adding are very important. Plus, there are things that are missing but essential. Ukraine, Dimas is here, he's saying a lot about the scoreboards or monitoring mechanism, for example, for political parts. We don't have annexes to change. But if we don't have these monitoring mechanisms, we are missing that. And just one small thing, because we still have more questions to come. I don't agree with Michael that, for example, if it's complicated, that should be dropped. For example, our consultations with financial sector showed that actually Ukraine is implementing MiFID. And they are interested in implementing in order to get this price of the internal market treatment for financial services. So I would not say, forget it's complicated. The life is complicated. Just we need to plan properly and maybe fund properly, but don't skip that.
Great, thank you very much for dealing with issues of such complexity. And we have now the final two questions, so over to you. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, of course, and sorry to be very country specific. I want to ask the question to Tina. She talked about the lack of laboratories in Georgia who are able to produce certificates for different goods. Sorry for my ignorance, I thought we had. And it's really a good opportunity here also to learn about the situation in our own respective countries. But why I thought we had this kind of laboratories, because I thought I went myself to one without going to the details of addresses, etc. So could you shed a bit more light where we are in that respect and what needs to be done?
Thank you very much. We will take another question, and because we are getting to closer to the end of our... So Agnieszka would like to...
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to ask a totally different question. Maybe it fits more to the final closing panel about what the trio can expect from and what kind of strategy. But since you tackled upon Eastern Partnership, Belarus, different issues, I just wanted to ask this question. Yesterday, I believe the European Commission representative said that the Eastern Partnership is there for 10 years and it's going to be there as the EU policy for another 10 years. So my question is, is it really going to be? I mean, the situation in Belarus specifically, maybe we are going to have the association trio as a new, and then something else for the other trio, or maybe even different things for Belarus and the two other countries. So that's the first question. And then what do we do with the other trio? You know, the EU relation at the other trio, really. Is there any ideas in the EU that you're familiar with, or maybe you could, I'm sorry, comment on this? And the final question is actually to the trio. Do you work together? Do you talk maybe about the other trio, like Belarus? Do you coordinate? If you could just enlighten, and what is your perspective, you know, how do you explain to the European Union how they should be, you know, think about Eastern Partnership, for example, you know, when you are the trio and there's the other trio. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is a big agenda to discuss, so feel free to drop, you know, any chapter that you find too complicated. But can I just bridge something which I think this is an important question, and takes me back to in Kyiv 10 years ago, before the DCFTA was basically signed, an Estonian representative talks about Estonia saying, we had 200 small slaughterhouses, I mean, where you kill animals. 200, they were not hygienic, they didn't meet EU standards. When we were ready for accession, we had only 40 of them. And it was worth it, because we became members. About laboratories, you know, what is the incentive, where are the funds? This is the issue of very complex, costly approximation. You know, laboratories, infrastructure, where is the, you know, does it fit? It hasn't been done. What is the actually investment? How has it worked? In terms of laboratories, slaughterhouses, whatever is needed to access the single market for the most sort of important products, agricultural products. And the issue of the Eastern Partnership, it's like sort of something we don't want to mention because we talk about the trio. The EU institutions insist on the Eastern Partnership. Any, you know, national strategies of how do we deal with the Eastern Partnership? Moldova has always been an Eastern Partnership enthusiast. Is it still the case? And Ukraine has been fairly silent. Is it going to continue? Is there any thinking? So feel free to choose. It's your, it's your choice.
Shall I start? No, okay. We'll roll this ball other side. Basically, first, Tina will answer about labs, but I want to reflect on the Kasta's question about does it worth it to have labs or change the rules that might affect some enterprises. I think yes, and not because of the EU market per se. We have two equally important parts. First, domestic market, because these changes, they affect the health of population and productivity of the sector, which is important for the internal purposes of the country. But that is a long-term change. You will see effects in years and years. But if you have labs, if you change your rules, you can sell to the third markets much more successfully. Ukraine have already seen that for actually animal products. After Ukrainian enterprises, some of them at least, were allowed to export to EU, that was a great selling point to start exporting to Arab world, to China, to Asia in general. Basically, it opened the world, which is much larger than EU. EU is huge, but the world is still larger. The same is the expected impact of the ACAA. I would not say that Ukraine would boom machine building exports to EU. Very unlikely. But Ukraine will be much better positioned to sell the machines to the world, which we do now, but we can do it much more effectively. So yes, it works. And basically about Eastern Partnership, then there were consultations about Eastern Partnership. That was actually 2 years ago, and then the situation was a bit different. I don't know how I would comment, because then it was clear why why it's still worthwhile. How I would answer this question now, it's very hard to say, because the countries are really diverging very significantly, and you said that other two. It's to keep Armenia and Azerbaijan as a one package. It's a very interesting political question, and I'm happy. I'm an economist, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or whatever official position, but. Basically, what I was saying then, and I saying probably still, there are things in which it's important to have a regional dimension, and we still have a technical things to work. Transport, geography would not change. We have things to work jointly on. Customs, borders, some. Like flows of information. There are some grounds where the regional dimension remains worthwhile, disregarding all geopolitical changes. But I am a strong proponent of having the freer as a, like on a faster track. It should be really more for more, and should not be like we have the lowest possible denominators, because it distracts very much.
Thank you very much. We need to accelerate the implementation of this panel, so I would invite you to.
Sorry for
Sure.
No.
Sure.
The agenda is so rich, so so comprehensive. So feel free to be selective.
Sure. Thanks, Kasia. I'll be very brief. Thanks a lot, Beata, for your question. The thing is not about not having exactly labs. The thing is to have a labs which allow businesses to access those labs with relatively low costs, and to have mutual recognition, to actually have a recognition in the EU. So the certificate issued in Georgia should be recognized at the EU border, which is not the case. This is the thing. And also the laboratories, we need more capacity, right? I mean, there are so many businesses, they do not have access to labs to check the food safety standards. At least that's what we could grasp in the consultations we ran while talking to businesses. This is it. And Veronika already said, why do we actually care about? And Kasia asked about it. And I think Veronika already well summarized it, because in the long run, this just simply opens door to the wider markets, right? And then, while global value chains move to sustainability, to higher standards, if you fall out today, then you just simply have no entrance later on, okay? Especially if you don't actually trade that much, as this is the case with Georgia. And another thing is, like, who are the other trade partners? Who are the other neighbors, right? The other neighbors are, Russia. The other neighbors are the other CIS country, Commonwealth of Independent States, and to enter those markets, and we can see that in Georgian experts, it's much easier because the standards are easily met, okay? But then, are those stable markets? Not really. Then you face embargoes from Russia, then you face a lot of political instability. So the question is, do you want to just focus on something that you have highly instability there? Maybe not. Maybe it's better to invest today in the slaughterhouses and building labs, and then tomorrow have simply better access to the wider market and to a more stable market in a way. And very briefly on the Eastern Partnership, again, I'm an expert. I don't represent here Georgia's position. Although, as a Georgian citizen, I'm very happy to see my country teamed up with the trio, because this is the agenda. This is more ambitious agenda, and Georgia has invested actually more than some of the other 3 EIP states like Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. And the price was paid for that, okay? So then I'm very happy to see Georgia being part of the trio. I hope this is going to sustain and this is going to be more institutionalized. But what I could say is, like, hearing a lot of times Georgian officials in Brussels, you know, there are a lot of questions why Georgia was very silent on Belarus, because Moldova and Ukraine were not so. And what I could just tell you, hearing Georgian officials, is that there is this Abkhazia recognition policy they would avoid. This is why they remain silent. Although, to me, as an expert, this is a lacks credibility, and I think the gains from that are just simply minimal, and the losses from them, simply you're not standing up for democracy, is a bit disappointing. And we saw recently Georgia even cooperating with the But the security services of Belarus doesn't look good. There are a lot of Belarusians coming to Georgia. I've personally met them, you know, looking for the shelter, and fairly so, right? You want to show your support to the people of Belarus, to democracy, and then this is just not going to the right direction, which I'm very sorry to observe. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for widening the agenda. Denis.
Promotion doesn't work? Okay, it works. So we need more consistency in terms of implementation of this idea, because I think that this is still an idea, a concept that needs a lot of institutionalization, a mechanism that really is not just on the paper, in the memorandum signed by the 3 MFAs, but it's also applied and involves the other institutions, presidency office, parliamentary, maybe why not some other agencies, if it's really worth it to expand it to why not like regulatory agencies, something else. And I think that the same could go also for discussing different issues that happen within the Eastern Partnership and are not related to the agenda of European integration of the 3 associated countries, and then probably Belarus and other countries could be a way to exactly not stay outside of the issues, because we are witnessing what is going on in the Eastern Partnership, and I think that sometimes we don't have the courage to really discuss openly and why not critically about the events going on in other countries. I know the political risks of that, the security risks, if it's, for instance, Georgia, which doesn't have solved, which is not totally at peace with how the borders with Azerbaijan are. They are not still fully demarcated, delineated. So we should take into account the costs which are coming with this kind of bold statements on Belarus or on Nagorno-Karabakh war. But overall, I think that you're right that we should not drop them out. And I think that we, within the project, try to actually keep the eye very close on what is going on in Armenia. We have a book which was published by an Armenian expert, and maybe Michael will mention more about that. We also involved all 6 EAP countries in our bulletins on vaccination and COVID in general, the management of the COVID situation in the region. So we are trying to not forget about the others, and actually to share with our expertise and know-how, and at the level of civil society, and sometimes even the officials from the other countries.
Thank you very much. We've had COVID mentioned in the panel.
I wanted that.
Yes. So Michael, the final word goes to you.
Yeah,
Do you want to take the mic?
I'd just like to have a second take on Leonid's question, but he's over there. Leonid? Oh. Anyway, doesn't matter. The question is the important one. I thought it would be interesting just to take the hypothesis that in the case of Ukraine, the chapters under which the performance is poor may be signaling to us chapters that are overloaded with excessively bureaucratic obligations that shouldn't be there and therefore should be deprioritized. So we can use our rating system to test this and look down which are the chapters where Ukraine is performing poorly, which I've just done, and it is rather interesting. The result is, these are the poor performers, should they be deprioritized? Number 1, rule of law. Okay. Number 2, anti-corruption. Number 3, intellectual property rights. Number 4, road transport policy. Now, the first 3 are very political, okay, road transport, excessively bureaucratic. But let us look into that, and in particular, the Poles here are very aware, I'm sure, of the road transport problems of the EU's exorbitant road transport protectionism, whereby Ukraine has a bottleneck in trade, a physical bottleneck in trade, but there's not enough truck licenses to get the stuff in and out of the European Union. Okay, we heard from Olga Stefanishina yesterday. I didn't have the time to talk through to her precisely, but she said she has agreement to open up conversation or negotiations for a road transport agreement. That would be very good. Let us say that that begins. Then what does Ukraine have to do in order to get the EU to open up? They have to apply these road transport safety regulations that get marked, a poor mark as of now. So even we pick up the case, which is the most technocratic, we discover that it is exceedingly important. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think we've lived up to expectations in terms of the comprehensiveness and depth of our agenda that we've discussed in the panel. So I would like to thank our panelists and apologize for eating into our coffee break, but I think we've been really sort of enriched in terms of understanding of all the sort of technical and political surroundings of the DCFTA. Thank you very much.
Thank you.